the latest MCU series drops on Disney+. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your excitement level for Ms. Marvel, and if you've seen the show, what did you think about it? I've seen the first 2 episodes. This will be a spoiler-free review, and let's get started with my initial thoughts on the good. And right off the bat, I found Ms. Marvel to be enjoyable enough. I wasn't really sure what to expect going into this show. My only real knowledge of Ms. Marvel comes from playing the Avengers video game from a couple years back, and I was like, okay, they're giving her a show. Let's see how that turns out. And then we saw the initial images that they put out, and they picked really bad first images to put out that just made it look really cheap and poorly done because they picked images out of context, which don't represent the show very well. And then the trailers themselves presented as going for a younger demographic than I fall into, and so I really wasn't sure how this show would work for me, and having seen the first 2 episodes, they worked well enough for me. I found the cast to be charming. Sometimes shows that are kind of aiming for those early teenagers, tween age range don't always sit well with me, but I found these characters to be fun and enjoyable. In particular, our title character, Kamala Khan, is quite charming and relatable because she is a fan of the Avengers and goes to conventions. Thus, we as the audience who are fans of the Avengers and go to conventions can relate to many of the experiences that she is going through. Also, it's just a very creative way that it visualizes a lot of what's going on. Like if she's having a text conversation while walking, it'll appear all around her, like on the ground. It's just very creative. Or if she's having a conversation, it'll visualize what she's thinking on the walls. And so it picks an interesting way to communicate information rather than showing us a phone or like just using voiceover of what's going on in her head. No, it visualizes it creatively. Also, this is very much a coming of age story, so it dives into her family life a lot, and I thought the way that it did it actually worked really well. There's a lot of similarities with Turning Red in certain dynamics with the parents, the nature of kind of what goes on with the character, what the character wants to do, scenarios that she's in. There's quite a few similarities to Turning Red. I thought it worked much better here in Ms. Marvel than it did in Turning Red. I was not a fan of Turning Red. This, I thought, did the same beats, same parent dynamics, same kind of rebellious activities of the teenager, but in a way where each side are better represented. Both sides come off much better than they came off in Turning Red. And likewise, it dives very much into her family heritage, her religious beliefs, and it does it in a way that makes it interesting. Kind of, I don't know how it'll play to the target audience, if they'll kind of understand the complexity of what's being communicated, but for me at least, I was kind of fascinated as it kind of dove into the history and traditions and stuff in ways, things that I wasn't familiar with. And as I said, I wasn't a big fan of Turning Red because when that movie went into specificity, I felt like it alienated me, whereas here, I found it fascinating and it drew me in. Maybe some of that's because I found the characters more endearing and the parents more reasonable in their reactions and their efforts to connect with their child. But this to me worked much, much better. And just in general, if you saw the initial trailers, if you weren't particularly familiar with the character and were kind of skeptical about this project, so was I. And having watched the first couple of episodes, I thought that it worked better than I was expecting it to. From there, let's move on to the mixed aspects. And the big thing you have to understand here is that this very much is a coming of age story targeting tweens, young teenagers. That's what it is. It's very light on action, at least in the first 2 episodes. Maybe as you move later on, gets more action focused. That's what happened with WandaVision. But in these first 2 episodes, it is, 90% coming of age, and then at the last little bit, there's a pinch of superhero stuff, just a pinch right at the end. And so you only get 2 pinches of superhero stuff and action in the first 2 episodes, and you get a lot of coming of age. And the reason that's really important is, we're 30 chapters or whatever into the MCU that has established these as big action spectacles. That's what you expect from the MCU based off this long history. And that's not what this delivers. That's not what this is in the first 2 episodes. So you have to go into this wanting to see a coming of age story about a teenage girl who's a big fan of real life superheroes in her world, who's struggling to connect with her parents and discovers that she has superpowers. And we only get a little bit of the actual hero stuff in these first 2 episodes, and it's a lot about her coming to grips with who she is and her family. That's what it is. That's quite different from what you normally expect from the MCU. And if you watch the trailers and you thought, oh, that looks awfully teeny boppery, yeah, that's what this is. It's a show that is aimed at a younger demographic. I've heard unfavorable comparisons to just being a Disney Channel original show. I think those are a little bit cruel in their implications, but they're not totally off base in the idea that that's the target age that this is going for. It is going for that age group. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I have 2 kids that are probably going to connect with this show much more than the other Marvel Disney Plus shows because they're in the proper age demographic that it's targeted. It's okay for not every show to be targeted towards me, a 40-year-old man, and you need to have properties that are designed to be on-ramp for the next generation of MCU fans. That's a good thing, but that also means a lot of people that have enjoyed most of the MCU up to this point in time probably aren't going to be very interested in this particular show and will likely sit it out because it's not for them. And if I'm being totally honest, if not for the fact that I am a diehard MCU fan that's going to watch everything that they put out, and if I didn't have 2 kids that are in the target audience that I want to get into this sort of thing, I don't know that this is a show that I would watch. Not because it's bad, just because it's not the sort of thing I naturally gravitate towards. I think it's doing what it's trying to do pretty well. It's enjoyable enough, but it's not something I would just gravitate towards. From there, let's move on to the bad. And probably the biggest straight up bad thing about this show is that the visualization of her powers just doesn't look good. It's just like these weird glowing rock things that look like CGI just dropped on the screen. It's very peculiar. For all the creative visuals that they do for her thoughts and texts, the way they visualize her powers and her energy bursts or whatever, I don't think it worked at all. That needed to be totally rethought, reimagined, and come up with something better. Likewise, it is a superhero show. It is about someone gaining powers, defeating bad guys. And 2 episodes in, I don't really know where this is going. And maybe it'll become a lot more clear as we move into it, but like 2 episodes in, it is legitimately 90% coming of age, little pinch superhero stuff. And that has me a little bit worried about where all this is headed, if they're going to have to rush a villain or it's kind of a really goofy villain or something like that with where all this is headed, because they don't really set up any sort of compelling threat in the first 2 episodes in that regard. And so it just kind of was like, okay, feels like we should have a little bit more of an idea where this is headed 2 episodes in. I think we got 6 episodes, we're a third of the way through, and I don't know at all what the villain is going to be here. To like just give you a specific example of this, the first 2 episodes spend more time establishing the conflict about how the local mosque is run than they do really clearly establishing the central villain threat of the season. And maybe that'll make sense as we go throughout the season, but given that most of the Disney Plus shows up to this point in time feel like they rushed the finale just to give us a big slam bang showdown, has me pretty concerned about where the season is going. But just in general, because it is aiming at such a younger demographic than really anything else in the MCU, it just feels like it's going to be a very big departure for a lot of the audience, and I can see a bunch of people sitting those out. It'll probably get some new fans because it is an entry point for a younger age, but at the same time, I wouldn't blame anyone if they're like, this one just doesn't look like it's for me. I think I'll sit it out. That's probably what I would do if this isn't what I did for a living and if I didn't have 2 kids that are much more in the target demographic. Real quick, quick before I give you my final thoughts, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Let me know what's your excitement level for this show, and if you've seen it, what did you think about it? Also, I've done a ton of coverage of the other Marvel Disney Plus shows. You can check that out right up here when this video is over with. In general, as someone who wasn't really sure what to expect from this show, I found it enjoyable enough. I'm curious to see what's going to happen next, and I found myself invested in the characters and their inner conflicts. But also the reality is, it's not a show that I probably would have watched if I wasn't a diehard MCU fan with children who are in the right demographic to make this something that maybe I can watch with them to get them more invested in the MCU. And so this isn't going to be for all MCU fans, but I think if you check it out, you'll probably enjoy it more than you were expecting you would. Let me know what you thought down below. Check out my other Marvel Disney Plus content right over there, and keep talking movies and TV too much.